in this next episode of the Waboripedia, the Figure Behind the Ink interview series, where we sit down with respected Horishi or traditional Japanese tattooers from all around the world. We will be sitting down with Chris Wielk. Chris Wielk is a New York City-based Horishi whose compositions bring to life the harmonious elements of traditional Japanese tattooing alongside Chris's own signature flair. Join me as we sit down with Chris Wielk and learn more about the figure behind the ink. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Wielk, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very excited to have you here. You take a look at your portfolio, you take a look at the work that your clients have publicly shared, and it looks like you can't miss. It's like you're constantly producing these amazing pieces of work.
That's very kind of you to say. I don't, it's always an uphill battle, it feels, but I appreciate that.
So I'm very, very happy to see every time you post something. I'm very excited to see, how it's looking. Usually it's looking great. It's looking perfect. From a traditional Japanese perspective, it's like, it blows my mind. It looks so good. So I think I'm very happy, and a lot of people are going to be very happy to learn a little bit more about you, about your trajectory, about how you operate, and so on and so forth. So getting right to it, why don't we begin by you just sharing, like, what's your tattoo background and how did you get started with Wabori?
If I look away, it's because I made some notes this morning as I was thinking back through this. But I started tattooing in 2013 and had more of a intention of just being a tattooer, walk-in tattoos, definitely geared more towards American traditional tattooing, and had always been impressed by Japanese style tattooing, but I just couldn't wrap my head around it, I would say. And especially as a young tattooer, it was like very hard to conceive of ever attempting something like that. But after a couple of years, I had a little more exposure to it and a little more just experience tattooing, and started getting more interested in larger work. And the more that I funneled down what I was interested in, it was kind of like things that related back to a tradition similar to American traditional, things that were sort of bold and heavy, a lot of weight, and all of those things sort of pointed me towards Japanese tattooing. And once I started down that path, you just kind of keep digging in deeper and deeper and deeper. I was fortunate to see the Perseverance show in Los Angeles. I think it was 2015. And it was like, I don't know, there were 30 or 50 people walking around with bodysuits, and there were lectures from Junie Salmon and Giovanni and, all these different people. And I was still like, the wheels were sort of spinning at that point, but I wasn't attempting anything yet. And then in 2016, my wife got a job in San Francisco. So we moved to the West Coast, and that's where I really started kind of thinking like, this is something that I want to do. Started painting a lot. I've always been somebody that's painted a lot of flash in general, but started kind of directing that towards that style. And then in 2017, a few things happened, but I got tattooed by Giovanni, and I went to Japan for the first time. And I think getting exposure to some of these things on like a different scale culturally definitely kind of cemented my feeling about wanting to pursue it. And at the same time, Jill was very open. She didn't have her shop yet. She was working in a private studio. But she was kind of like, if you need anything, let me know. And then I just never stopped bothering her and needed things constantly. And, she really helped put me on that path. So that was really where I would say, shifted from like being somewhat of a generalist with an interest in this to like, this is what I'm going to do and pursue. And that was 6 or 7 years ago now.
Awesome. Yeah, I like how, usually it's people helping each other out in some respect. You mentioned Giovanni, obviously great figure in the world of traditional Japanese tattooing here in the US as well. So So actually, at least into something else. You mentioned transitioning fully into traditional Japanese tattoos. That's obviously what you're doing right now while we're talking to you. You're doing some great work. What has been your biggest influence in sort of crafting your own way? Because you have a very particular, and this is something I also hear from the community. Chris Wielk has his own style. It's like you can tell this is a Chris Wielk tattoo.
I think, the first couple of year or two, especially when I was with Jill, it was a very heavy focus on kind of very directly referencing ukiyo-e prints or other masters. She's heavily influenced and sort of a student of Horiyoshi 3, so there's a lot of trickle down of that in her work. And it's not exactly the style that I tattoo in, but we were kind of like connecting the dots and looking at old sayings, looking at a lot of like the Osen books. I don't know if you've seen those before, and tattoos from like kind of the 1950s, 60s, 70s in Japan. Excuse me. So I think I spent a good amount of time sort of building a foundation on these traditional imagery. And then, but I think over the last couple of years, I've been able to maybe put in a little bit more of my own influence. And that probably comes, I think some of what comes through are the roots and from the American traditional perspective, as well as seeing a lot of the contemporary tattooers that I feel like are sort of mixing these things. I think it started a lot with somebody like Koji Ichimaru, who's incredible, and it's like a terrible tragedy that he's not here anymore. As well as a lot of the people, kind of understanding like the Horikyo family and a lot of these people like Bunshin Horitoshi or Horien, or people who I feel like they have a very strict tradition and lineage through Japanese tattooing, but they're also bringing in kind of a contemporary style to it. And I think all of those things influence me and sort of just open the doors for me to, at this point, I sort of draw the way that I draw. And if somebody, I'm always looking at reference. I have a huge reference library, and still start with, whenever I have a request, I'm always starting with a Kuniyoshi print or anything like that. But I'm able to I just draw the way that I draw it, or the way that I see it, which I think there are, I have limitations to how I can draw, but that sort of helps me simplify things, and everything ends up looking the way, I think with everything looks the way that I like how you do it. Like with anything, if you're trying to copy something enough, it's ultimately going through your hand and then onto the skin. So it's not like an intentional style is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I paint a lot and draw a lot. I don't as much as I used to, because now I tattoo a lot and have a baby, but doing those things really help develop that. It's just kind of like, paint 100 dragons and then you'll have a style of dragon that you do. I guess that's the answer.
Oh, that's a cool take. I like that last bit, in 100 dragons. But maybe that's gonna be like a quote in the in the future for other tattooers. That's cool. Yeah, no, I look at your dragon, sticking to the dragon in your Instagram profile picture, and it just screams Chris Wielk, right? It's like very cool to have your own distinctive style, because obviously people, they might forget your name, but they still know, hey, it's that one guy, and they sort of know that it's you, right? So that's very cool. It's very cool. Awesome. So actually, I'm reading here. I'm looking at a notebook because I have a question from the community, and it trails nicely with what we just mentioned. And I'm gonna quote, like read it literally. And it says that your compositions contain excellent harmonious pairings, and your clients seem to have great taste. I agree, by the way. How long did it take to establish a customer base like that? And do you ever want to break away from tattooing like popular figures and do more obscure, not so popular work?
I think my clients do have great taste somehow. That's like that's good luck on my part, I guess. I'm really fortunate to have people that have great taste. I think it's taken as long as I've been tattooing to establish this customer base. It's very, I've been working back in New York for over 3 years now, and I moved from San Francisco and kind of started over again and started doing walk-ins and building up. Well, one of the tattoos I think that we'll talk about was actually something that I worked with, and that was kind of a thing that I needed to be like, I need to like start showing that I'm doing these tattoos in New York again. I was continuing to go to San Francisco the entire, year and a half that I lived in New York before COVID. So I was still working on large things, but here I was really just doing walk-ins and trying to like, somebody gets a small tattoo and they're like, oh, I've thought about getting a sleeve, and you're like, oh, you should really do that, and just kind of pitching it to people. And it started to snowball from there. And then I think people seeing, I think the painting and artwork has always carried me through, where people start seeing those things and it generates interest. But it's taken, it took me a couple of years to get to a point where I was able to stop doing walk-ins. Now I work by appointment only. I have my own studio. And I think, I think part of the job, or part of my job, is sort of directing the taste of people as well. And people have these ideas, and you're like, it's very, the relationship that I have with all of my clients is it's back and forth. Like people come to me with great ideas, but sometimes people come to you with not so great ideas, and it's your job to make them great ideas. Or I don't mean to say not so great ideas, but they just don't get it, and they've seen 10 things and they throw them all at you, and you have to kind of distill it into like, okay, let's make this something cool. Let's make this something that you love and that I love and everybody's happy with, and that kind of makes sense in the world of traditional, concepts. So I've just been fortunate to have people, but I still get all the time, I'll meet people or I'll get the email and you're like, is this something that, it's like, is this cool? I don't know, but I actually think I really like that. I think that collaboration is what makes it interesting, and finding it's like a series of problem solving and like finding the best path. And that's what makes the most interesting tattoos. The most interesting and unique things I've done weren't my ideas. They're somebody else's ideas that I've had to carve into something that became unique and cool. If it was my idea all the time, it would just be dragons and koi fish, and it's not that it's fun, but it's not that unique, And then, do I ever want to break away from the popular figures? Sure. I think being a Westerner tattooing in a place like New York City, the reality is I tattoo a lot of dragons, I tattoo a lot of tigers, I tattoo a lot of koi fish. I am, I do get to do some warriors and things like that, but it's less what the clientele is interested in. And it's rare, when I do get to do something that's a little more unique or based on something that's a little more obscure, it tends to be because somebody says, I want a samurai. And you say, well, do you really want a samurai, or do you want one of these warriors? It's like, you're still kind of like steering it towards something that is a little more obscure or unique. It's, that's how it happens most of the time. Occasionally I'll get somebody who's like hyper fixated on an obscure story, and that's very cool and interesting. But I would say that is few and far between. For the most part, it's kind of these general concepts that people want, and then you get to kind of, like I said, kind of steer the ship into the direction that would be more fitting of a traditional concept. But I would love to do more, do more diverse subject matter, although I'm happy just tattooing whatever people want, I'm happy to do.
That's awesome. And that's great to hear. Some artists, I'm not trying to bash anyone specific in here, I'm saying this in general, but some people might just take whatever their clients request and just do that, no matter how terrible it might look in the present or in the future, right? Because that's also something people should have into consideration. Like, how's it going to look 5, 10, 20 years from now, right? But it's good to hear that you're chiming in and being that voice of reason to make sure that they get something that makes sense within the constraints, or not constraints, but the boundaries of traditional Japanese tattooing and tattooing in general, perhaps, right?
I think it's important. And I think a lot of the people that I look up to as contemporary tattooers are, I'll often see things and I'm kind of impressed that like they took that on because maybe it is kind of a wacky idea or something kind of out, or maybe it's an insane cover up or just something that I think would be easy to turn down or say that's not cool or that's not good or whatever. But I think part of the being a good tattooer is kind of taking your client's idea and turning it into something great. And sometimes it starts as a great idea and sometimes it starts as a weird idea, but you have to make it great. And a lot of the things that I found surprising or that surprised me the most are those tattoos where I'm like, oh, I don't really know, but I'll give it a shot and like try to make this person happy, do my my best attempt at it, and those end up being the things that almost like push the needle or the boundary further for my creativity. And then you see it filter down into something that's maybe more of a traditional concept, but you're like, I did this one weird thing on this person because that's just what they wanted, and I wasn't so sure, but you kind of go for it, and it helps expand all those things. And that probably is a lot of where, if there's anything unique in like the style that I tattoo, and it's because clients have unique ideas and you're trying to just make them work, just trying to make everything work.
Well, cool. So actually, in that line of that train of thought, do you actually have like a favorite? I know you mentioned dragon. Wait, are those like your favorite subjects, or do you have like a favorite design or character or whatever?
I would say dragons are definitely my favorite thing to draw. They can be challenging to tattoo depending on the tattoo, but I think it's the thing that is the most that you have to draw and is why it kind of comes out in a particular style. I mean, you can certainly reference any great master style, but it's not something that you see a lot of in Japanese artwork in its full form in a way that then can be translated to a tattoo directly. So you really, understanding the composition and okay, if the head is here, where the claw is going to be, and the neck and the body and the tail, and then how do those things sit on a body and on a back? It's almost the easiest because it is a flat surface and you can just draw this dragon and stick it on somebody's back. But something like a sleeve, you really have to think about the composition and how it moves and the focal points. And I think that's the most interesting thing for me to draw, and you can find the most creativity because there's the least amount of like there's the it's not like working off of something like an ukiyo-e print where you can only get so far away from kuniyoshi until it doesn't make sense anymore, or whichever whoever you're following. And a lot of the other subject matter, you really can sort of find these like cut and paste images and make them work, and that's there's nothing wrong with doing that. Even if it's a tiger or a koi fish or whatever, you can really find them in Japanese artwork and just stick them on somebody. But I think that what makes dragons the most compelling is that you have to be able to draw them. And then there's just a lot, they're very, they're mean looking, and you can do all kinds of fun things with color and fire and lightning and all these things. I think people tend to gravitate towards that. And so I do as well. Like if I don't know what to draw, or if I'm just doing like sketchbook and I'm bored or killing time or whatever, that's always what I end up doing. The flip side of that is that's what I always end up doing. And there probably are other things that I would like to tattoo, but I'm happy tattooing as many dragons as I can.
Cool. So actually, that was one of my other questions. Like if there's stuff that you want to tattoo but haven't had the chance yet. But before we do that, I just want to echo, because it's so true. I'm gonna do a little plug here, but for the Waboripedia book, right? I'm compiling and manually color correcting old ukiyo-e prints. And so, for example, for the dragon, it was a journey. It was an odyssey. Looking for dragon references in ukiyo-e, there aren't that many, like you said. It's sort of surprising. So it's a challenge for tattooers, and people don't realize this, right? I didn't realize this until I was compiling or coming up with the book. There aren't that many references for like full references for dragons.
Well, no, there's really, it could be kuniyoshi, I could be wrong, but there's that one print where there's kind of like two side by side, one, and they're maybe like brown and red or something like that. I don't know if you're familiar with what I'm talking about. And then, but everything else, you're kind of seeing these pieces of them. And then, a lot of not from woodblock prints, but from the paintings, you'll see things where it's like the top half of the dragon emerging from clouds, or any that kind of stuff. It took me, when I first started doing becoming interested in doing this style, I couldn't draw dragons at all. It was terrible. I didn't know what, I really struggled with it. And it took me, on my second trip to Japan, I kind of was like, I'm just going to take pictures of everything that I can that has a dragon on it, and it's temple carvings and paintings and all these other things outside of the world of woodblock prints. And then I just started really trying to figure it out and like crack the code almost of how to put them together. And I think that is something that, it's hard to find reference for. And then you're kind of like, you need to find bits and pieces of reference and then study tattoos and how do people put them together. And then there's kind of this other like, and then how do I want to do it versus how does this person do it? But it's a really interesting thing. And I think there's more, it's a hard thing to find reference for, certainly. I'm curious to see what the pages look like that you put together.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so it's, dragon is one of the more creative outlets for tattooers that put it into the body. But going back to the question that I alluded to earlier, are there any subjects or designs that you would like to tattoo but haven't had the chance yet?
I think, like I said earlier, I'm sort of boring. I really like all the very traditional concepts, and the things I keep trying to tell people. I'm like, I just want to do like a giant koi fish on a back piece, or a big Hanya, or a Hanya and snake, or something that's like a little less complex, maybe. It's all complex in its own way, but something that's like, I really am drawn to images, especially if we're talking about back pieces, where they are like a very large image taking up the space, more so than a composition of many things, or maybe, you have things on the backs of the thighs or whatever, but the central image is very large. So I would love to do things like that, or even like I've done a bunch of, a lot of dragon backs. I've never done like just a snake, or so I'm working on a tiger right now, but some of these things that are almost less, unique. I'm fortunate that I've been able to do some backs that are really interesting, more niche subject matter.
Yeah.
So I'd like to kind of have a few of these more general things. I'd also love to do, I started 2 Fudomio backs. I don't know what the state of them being completed ever is, but I'd love to do a full Fudomio. And, I any type of warrior, they're all really cool. I think it's not a harder sell, but it's just something that people don't see as much. Like Chojan obviously is an incredible one. I'd love to do that. But I try not to oversell what I want to do, because if the client, it has to be what the client wants and what they're happy with. And I've seen that go in the wrong direction before, where somebody kind of imposes too much of their own desire on the client, and then they're kind of like not as excited about what the tattoo is. So to me, it only works if the client is excited at the end of it as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and that also makes sense in the big simple. I always say that simple sounds kind of crude, but it shouldn't sound crude. I mean, simple is good. These big simple back pieces are always just so powerful, right? So it just focuses your eyes on the work. You're not. It's also cool to look at the little details and stuff, right? But when you can tell at a distance, hey, this is a koi, this is a dragon, this is a whatever, right? It just has a different level of power to it.
Yeah, I think I've always been drawn to things like that. We're, talking a little bit offline before. I don't have a Japanese back piece. I have an American traditional back piece that I got, before I was even really tattooing. But it's like a giant American traditional girl head. It's bigger than a human head with this big snake going around it. And it's like, I think I've always, in any world, I feel, or any style of tattooing, I think if you're doing a back, you should just make the thing as big as possible. It's the only area you can stretch something that large. I think you can piece together interesting compositions, but it's almost I don't want to say a waste of the space, because people do incredible work where they're doing very intricate, detailed back pieces. But to me, it's like, that's your one chance. Make it as big as possible, make it focal, and then you can hide all kinds of cool, interesting details on arms and legs, the front and everything, but the back is like, that's your opportunity to really have a striking, large scale image. But that's just, that's my opinion. That's what I like to look at. But, people, I'm always very impressed when people do the opposite. So there's kind of like, if you do it well, anything can look good.
Yeah. Well, so actually I have the next question I have here is one that I always ask everybody that I have here, whether it's the written interviews online and Instagram or the podcast type of interviews like the one we're doing right now. But, going back to Suikoden, huge novel with huge impact on many things, Asia, but particularly, of course, in the world of tattooing, traditional Japanese tattooing, huge impact since its publication in Japan in the Edo period, right? So this is all leading to the question of, do you have like a favorite outlaw or scene from the Suikoden? And before you answer that one, I was looking through all your work, right? I always like to look through all of the Horishi's work before I actually interview them. And I noticed that at least in recent posts, right, you don't have that many warriors like you mentioned before, right? So I was curious, hey, what is Chris's take on the Suikoden outlaws?
I feel I just listened to Yutaro's interview, and I feel embarrassed also that I've never read it. I have studied a lot of the prints and the artwork and kind of backtracked the story from, which I think many of us do, where it sounds like you've read the whole thing before, but I think a lot of people kind of piece it out where you go, this is a cool image. What's this one about? I would love to read the whole thing or listen to it someday. There was a podcast that I listened to a good bit of that somebody was, I forget if he was reading it or just describing the story, but it was kind of this very long form thing, and I got pretty into that. I really also am a fan of Kaosho. I am working at a Kaosho Roshishin Backpiece right now with one of my clients. He recently finished a sleeve of all peonies, and he wanted to do a warrior Backpiece, and I suggested doing the flower monk as the kind of the right pairing for that, and just kind of described it and showed him the imagery, and he was very impressed with all of, seeing the pictures. I think that's the image that I've painted the most, certainly. So I would say he's the one that I, for whatever reason, whether it's the story or the imagery, the one that I'm always the most drawn to. I would love to do more of them. I think kind of, like I've said, it's hard. I think those images are sometimes harder for Westerners to connect to, unless they're extremely obsessed with Japanese tattooing. But for kind of the generalist who wants to get a Japanese style tattoo, like I said, it's often samurai. I want a samurai. It's not, I want a tattooed warrior. And sometimes you can kind of shift into that direction and expose people to this other idea, but it has more to do with what people ask of me and less to do with what I would desire to do. I want to do all of them. That's the answer. I'd like to do all of them. But certainly Kaosho, and I'm very fortunate to be working on one. I'd love to do Choja. I'd love to do, Kumandu and some of these other, like the very popular, the most iconic ones are certainly the ones that I'm, the most interested in. But I pull out the book whenever I see, when people kind of start having interest in those things, I'll show them all of them. I don't really, you and I know what the most popular, most tattooed ones are, but a lot of the, general clientele does not. So I'll kind of hand them the book and say, which one do you like? Sometimes they gravitate towards the most popular ones, but sometimes they pick out sort of interesting and different ones. I've done a few, it's a couple years back now, but I did a couple of commission paintings, and I forget what the characters' names were, but I did some that were sort of unique and different, and the person was like, I want these two. And clearly they had the book and were picking out more obscure characters intentionally. Yes. But I think that stuff's always interesting. It's really just a matter of what I have the opportunity to do. If I had more time, I'd paint all of them also and try to push it harder, but I don't, to make 108 paintings is going to take a while.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And like you said, there's like multiple levels of complexity, might not be the right word, but like reasons why perhaps they're not as common in the West for people to get tattooed. One is, well, you need to be really into Japanese tattooing or Chinese mythology or whatever to really know these characters, right? It's hundreds of pages long, this novel, right? Not many people read that long a book nowadays, right?
I do think people might feel differently about wearing some of those images versus more like something that's like totally mythological, like a Kintaro or one of the gods or something like that, where it's like it's not a direct representation of a person from another culture. Maybe there's something in that, or people just don't, which I don't have any issue with. Certainly, it's what, we love all of these things, and I think following the tradition is the thing that's interesting, but people aren't as maybe just don't feel as connected to it, so they're not as compelled to. So they're impressed by the imagery, but that's not the image that they want on them.
Yeah,
that's sort of my take. Although people love, it's funny how for me, I get a lot of requests to do, like, people love like an anthropomorphic animal with a bodysuit, or like little tattoos with tattoos on them. But when you propose it to somebody with a back piece, they're like, "Oh, it's not really what I want." It's just a funny thing where, on a smaller scale, when I did the last book of Flash I put out, I did Kuwandu and Kaosho little tattoo, Flash designs, and I still haven't tattooed them. But I thought those were the ones that everybody would want, because people love to get Mon Cat style thing or whatever, a small tattoo with tattoos. But I just, I do what people ask. So it's kind of until they come to me with that. But I think with a lot of what you see in Japan, there's a lot of imagery, like a lot of the things from the kabuki plays and some of these other more obscure stories and characters, or that seem obscure to us, just aren't obscure to somebody that is from that culture. So you wonder. I think a couple of years ago, I was thought that was the direction that I would be going in, or what I'd want to focus on, and I would love to do any of those things. But people, in New York City or in the West, just generally don't understand that stuff as much, or that's not what they grew up with. So they're pulling from, I get a lot more requests that pull from people's interest in anime or manga than from kabuki plays. It's it's a different thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. And before we move on to the next topic, I just want to call out that, maybe it's even an unfair question I ask about why, certain tattooers don't get certain subject matter of whatever, right? Because ultimately it is the client's body and request, right? There's only so much you can push. So obviously there's some boundaries or limits to what people can do. And otherwise, but like Chris said here, he would love to do all the outlaws, but that's quite an undertaking, by the way.
Yeah.
So
I'd be happy to do all of them. I think something that that you can do is produce artwork and represent the things in the way that you would like to tattoo them, and that's something that I have done a lot of in the past. I find it harder to do these days. I'm very busy tattooing and parenting and all of these other things, so I don't get to paint as much as I would like to. But if I have more of an opportunity to do that, maybe I'll have more of an if you present the image, you do need to wait for the people to come to you with these ideas, but you can also present them with your ideas ahead of time, and I think that helps a lot. So that's something that I would certainly like to focus on more going forward.
Boom. Awesome. So shifting gears here, taking a look at actually the awesome work that you've been doing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sharing my screen so that Chris Wielk here can walk us through some of the tattoos that he's done. Let me start sharing. All right. So usually I just shut up here and I'll let you do all this talking.
Okay. This is a pair of sleeves with Chrysanthemum and Wind on my client Eileen. She came to me a little over a year ago, about a year and a half ago. These were her first tattoos. And she said she wanted traditional sleeves, and I always find that or sometimes find that people can be a little ambitious with their desires before they've ever had a tattoo. So we kind of, I, not that I'm hesitant, but what we did was we started by just outlining the flowers. It was like, let's just kind of start here and build it up. And once we know that you're not fully committed, but that you're, are happy with the process and all of these things and just getting a tattoo, we kind of kept building from there and put the first side together and then reflected it on the other side. They were both outlined at once, and she was coming in every week, I believe, or every week or two. And we kind of just bounced back and forth in terms of completing them. So we weren't doing really long sessions. It was maybe about 2 hours at a time, hour and a half, 2 hours. But she got them done in about before the end of the year. I want to say we started in April, maybe, or May of 2022 and finished by around November, which was really an incredible feat on her end. I think, as if anybody's gotten a large tattoo, it's a lot and it's painful and, it's a big commitment, and she kind of jumped right into it. And, this was another interesting one where I think this is probably one of the most popular, seen images of tattoo that I've done. And it is another thing where it really was a collaboration. She was very, had particular input on the specific color choices and the way that the chrysanthemums were, and not in a be overly picky kind of way, but just she knew what she wanted. And I thought that was actually really great because it helped kind of create that collaboration. Whereas had I done it, with full freedom, it might have come out different. But I actually think this is the best way that it could have come out. And it's, it's a tattoo that has been very important, or two tattoos that have been very important for me to do. I think I've never done, the first time I've done 2 full sleeves with a matching composition without any crazy cover-ups or any other limitations. And I think it's because she completed it in such a short time, it's very representative of the style that I'm interested in tattooing in now, which is something that happens when you do large scale tattoos. If you start a Backpiece and it takes 2 or 3 years, by the time you finish it, you're finishing choices that were made years ago. Your style maybe has evolved, where because this one was completed so quickly, it still feels very like of the time for how I'd like my tattoos to look. And since then, she's working on a full bodysuit. So her whole back is outlined, one whole leg is outlined. We will be starting, I'm actually tattooing her tonight, and then we're starting her other leg the following session. We have one more flowered outline on her side. But yeah, she's an incredible client. She works, she's cuffs it out. She's gone from having no tattoos to almost 2 full sleeves and the better part of a bodysuit outlined in a year. She walks around with these sleeves in New York, and I've had people stop her. She's given them my information, and they've gotten tattooed by me. So it's kind of the best walking advertisement that I've ever had. And she's of course a very nice client to work with, and they look great on her. So it's one of the probably the tattoo that I'm the most proud of. And I think also, going back to the types of things that I like, it's very simple and straightforward. I love sort of being challenged with more intricate compositions, but I think something like this that's just straightforward, simple, classic designs is kind of where my heart will always be with any type of tattoo.
No, and I think it's gonna be very hard to find somebody who can appreciate a tattoo like this. It's just simple, it's beautiful, it's powerful, it's traditional Japanese, right? I think I always say it. I think probably almost in every interview now, right? But when people think traditional Japanese tattooing, I think probably one of the more common designs that will come to mind are the flower tattoos, right? The simple flower tattoos, and that's what we're seeing here, and it looks fantastic as expected, right? And it's very cool to see more of it.
They're not and I think something that I really like, about this tattoo on her and just in general with something like this is it's not particularly, you can kind of read it however you'd like. It's beautiful, it's strong, it's tough, it's not particularly masculine, it's not particularly feminine. It just kind of reads as very iconic. And it's sort of up to the wearer to interpret how they're wearing, look at how they're presenting themselves. And I think it's really cool to see. I don't want to speak on a client's behalf, but I feel like even just seeing her walk in with these two sleeves, and it like presents it in a different type of confidence than when they first came in with no tattoos, and it's kind of like a different type of it really helps the person embody who they really are, maybe, which is really interesting transformation with all this type of large scale tattooing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, you could look at this and you could interpret it in 1,000 ways, right? It's a beautiful piece. It's a badass piece. It's a powerful piece. It's just fantastic. That's it. It's just a fantastic composition. Cool.
Thank you.
I could stay here and keep talking hours about these kind of tattoos. So let's just keep the ball moving forward. Let's look what else we have in here. Boom.
All right, this one is Tamatori-hime on my friend, on a friend of mine who used to work at the shop that I was at. She is an incredible cosmetic tattooer. She's since moved back home, out of the country, so she's in Australia. This was the back that I started when I moved back to the East Coast. We actually did, you can see just the tail, like, the bottom bit of it on her right leg, but she has a big koi fish with cherry blossoms that we did so I moved back in 2019. So we started that in the summer of 2019. She had a big snake and peonies done by somebody else on her thigh, and we just kind of connected it and finished it down to her ankle. And then she asked me if I'd want to do her back piece, and this was definitely another, I would say, collaboration in terms of the subject matter, where she didn't really know specifically what she wanted, but I kind of, we were spending a lot of time together because we were coworkers, so we would just be in the shop and pulling out books and saying, what about this kind of thing? And she'd show me a picture of a tattoo and say, I'd like something directionally like this, and it was often people with, it always kind of came back to like a human figure with a creature. That was kind of where the guidelines were. We almost, at one point I drew on her like one of the Suikoden warriors, but it was a warrior with a tiger. And it was like a bit too masculine, I think. And then we ended up going towards this imagery, and this is based on the Kuniyoshi print, and she didn't want there's often you see the sort of the half naked woman with the dragon, and she wanted something where we could do patterns and a little more detail in the robe. But she also really wanted this simple color palette, which was a little bit of a challenge. I mean, I think it's such an iconic classic palette to use, and there was a time where I was really interested in this, almost sort of like a less colorful palette, going back to the tattoos of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and earlier than that. But I've since sort of gravitated away from it. So I think trying to create the composition and make it interesting and readable and clear, only using a few colors, is like a whole different challenge, which ultimately I think we managed to pull off. But yeah, a lot of these things were choices that were, again, like a collaboration between myself and the client. It wasn't just me saying, this is what you're going to get. There's also a few cover-ups of the rocks on the backs of her thighs have cover-ups in them. And then there's some other tattoos that you can't really see, but she has on her sides. But all of those things sort of dictate the choices that you make, where it's not, it's rare that it's always a blank canvas on anybody. You have to kind of create the composition around what's already there. And then, you almost impose these different limitations between color choices and subject matter, and funnel down what what's going to make the most sense. But I'm really happy with this tattoo. I think it's it was like a major step forward in terms of me being able to start doing large work again on the East Coast and have people see it. And another thing where people would see it, it's on her back, so people aren't seeing it walking around the street like a pair of sleeves, but just people seeing it, people seeing me work on it in the shop, just that kind of thing helps push forward a lot of the other large work that I ultimately ended up doing or have been doing since then.
Well, yeah, I love particularly the robes, right? The patterns on the robes. So that's always amazing to me. And you pulled it off beautifully in here, right? And like you said, there's two versions, right? There's the topless version, if you will, and then there's the robe version, which I believe you're obviously interpreting here. But of course with your own flavor, and it just looks fantastic. And for those listening, obviously, again, a robed Tamatori-hime with the pearl in hand, knife in hand, and the dragon, and it just looks fantastic. Again, that's why we're talking about it, right? Because it looks fantastic. And I also like what you did with like you said, with the limited color palette. It looks very classic, right? It looks very traditional, and it's amazing that you managed to pull it off.
I think I'm pretty happy. I'm of course very happy with how this one came out, and people do reference this. I kind of get clients who are in two camps, and a lot of people love the super bright, colorful things, but the people that want a limited palette always reference this tattoo. And I have a handful of back pieces, the photos printed on my walls, and that this is one of them. And it's always, when I'm having a consultation and we're talking about colors, you can always tell people are like, I want that one. I want it to look like that. And it's pretty interesting that it's such a, people are drawn to it in a way that very particular, which I think is really cool.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Let's see what else we have in here. All right.
This tattoo is, this is the pictures that I just posted, right? So these are the healed ones, I think.
Yeah.
My client's name is Peter. He's a really cool guy that he came to me with this image. It says this in the caption, and I feel like I hope people read the caption. The tattoo on his stomach was done by Rodrigo Mello. It's incredible, and I think very much enhances the tattoo that I have done. So I feel like lately I've been getting a lot of really great response. I did this tattoo about a year ago, and then 2 weeks ago he sent me a message and said, "Hey, I'm going to be in your neighborhood if you'd like to get some healed photos of it." So these are from the healed pictures, and I reposted it, and it's gotten a lot of attention. But I just like to make clear that I did not do the tattoo on his stomach. But I think seeing that tattoo with the sleeve is obviously like a major part of the story of this guy's bodysuit. And makes my tattoo, having my work next to work from an incredible master like Rodrigo is certainly only enhances the things that I've done. It also created, a really great opportunity to do the web background, which I really like. I think, so I guess he came to me, he had this tattoo on his stomach, and he was just looking for a sleeve to pair with it. He does have a cover up, which is sort of in the rock on his shoulder, and then his back piece extends a little bit. You can see I think he has a battle royale on his back, so you can see a bit of the wing kind of peeking out into that rock on his shoulder as well. But again, this is another instance of sort of starting with the limitations or the things that were already there and figuring out how we could build around it. So I forget the character's name, the woman that is on his stomach, but we knew that putting a Tsuchigumo, the spider, with her was the correct pairing. And then I think he just said, these are other things that I like. I like skulls, I'd like flowers, whatever. We went with the Chrysanthemum. He has maple leaves on his stomach, but we felt at least that kind of sat in the same world rather than putting cherry blossoms or something else on it. And so we pieced the composition together from there, but I think so we created with the cover up sort of this idea of it's almost like a spider in a cave or in, it's like the webbing's coming out from under the rock. And a lot of that was done because of what needed to be done there, but it also allowed for a nice bridge in the composition from the arm to the stomach and repeating some of the same background, even though we couldn't carry it all the way around. I think this tattoo also, I mean, the colors are incredible. These are healed. Whatever he does to heal his tattoos is what everybody should do. It's, everything's perfect on him. He had just come back after these photos. He had just been in Greece for a month and in the sun. And, he said he'd take care of his tattoos and put sunscreen on, but just the fact that everything stays so bright and solid, and you can see bits and pieces of his back piece that I want to say is, much older than his stomach, and everything looks great on him. So I think it's sort of the bigger picture of how the client is able to wear them. But from a composition standpoint and a story standpoint, we just kind of pieced together some ideas that he wanted and worked around the limitations. And I'm really happy with how it all came together. He has more on the inside of his arm. He has more skulls. There's not a cover up, but I want to say he has some lettering or a name on his inner bicep. But we just worked around all of those things, and I think it all, pieced together pretty well.
Awesome. Yeah, I wanted to show this one because it just speaks to the level of skill that you possess and being able to merge, two different pieces of work, right? This is, like you mentioned, Rodrigo Melo, another great artist, and then you managed to merge or marry your own composition in there so beautifully. It looks like, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people think that this whole thing was you, right? Even though, again, you mentioned Rodrigo Melo did the belly area in there, but it just looks so well synergized or mixed that, I felt like we definitely needed to talk about it. And I also love how you mentioned, the spider coming out of the caves, that's in line with nature, but then also with the stories, right? With many stories, like Japanese folk tales with these huge spiders that resided in caves. So I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it came out beautifully, right? And with the skulls too, right? So it's just an incredible composition. And then hearing how you said that, your client is just keeping it in such great condition, the colors pop out and it just looks fantastic.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, something that I think a shift that I've seen in with a lot of clientele, I would say somebody like Peter definitely represents sort of the way that people had gotten tattooed maybe prior to the last 5 years or so with social media. I've seen, working with Jill especially, a lot of clients with these bodysuits that are composed of work from different artists, and they would maybe get sleeves from, if it was, people weren't so singularly focused on one artist's vision necessarily, but they would get, their back piece from Horizakura, and then their sleeves from Chris O'Donnell, and then Jill would do the front panels, and it was this other thing. And I think as much as, we all love to, or I love to do complete works on people, it's interesting to see how you can piece things together and make it harmonious with all the other work on somebody, especially if their style is, I don't think that Rodrigo's style is entirely differently, from mine in terms of, I'd certainly respect him and look at what he does and influenced and inspired by it. But, I still had to kind of look at it and go like, okay, how did he do this? How can I make sure that it matches up correctly, but also looks like the way that I wanted to do it, and just making choices around that. I think it's really interesting. And I like doing, it often happens where people get something started in one place and then, they move to another location and they can't access the artist in the same way. So then you have to do, they have one sleeve completed, you have to do the other sleeve to balance it out. And I think all of those things help influence the way that you make choices around the tattoo. So it's always really a fun challenge.
Well, so all right, let's see. There's at least one more. Okay, this is the last one. Go ahead.
This is my client Ray. He finished this tattoo around the end of last year, I believe. He was awesome. He also has, you can sort of see, he has these two half sleeves that were done in, not really a traditional style, but I want to say they're dragons, and there's lightning on them, on his forearm, or on his upper arms. And he also has a really small tattoo on his right butt cheek, sort of under the jewel that the dragon is holding, that you can almost see there. It's a little
Wait,
Tweety bird. He, but otherwise had no tattoos, and he was a little bit. Uh, he was in his 50s, kind of like, which was pretty cool. It's just cool that this guy didn't really have uh, a ton of tattoos, and in his 50s came to me and said, "I want to get this back piece." And he traveled from New Jersey to New York. He came every, I want to say, 2 to 4 weeks, and just did a couple hours at a time. And it kind of worked out really well. We just sort of pieced it together. This was another one of those things where I feel like for a tattoo that all the choices made on it were, or all the choices were made a couple of years ago. Even by the end of it, I'm still really happy with it. I still feel like it's showcasing things that I liked about the way that I'd like to tattoo. I think the lightning was really something that I wanted to do bigger and bolder. I really like the color choices. He was very open to bright colors. And we ended up I don't always do a lot of color studies for my tattoos, but in this one, I think we kind of pulled together a few different options and kind of figured out the best way to like get as much, he wanted bright colors. And this photo is taken, I still don't have a healed picture of this. So this was the last day that I tattooed him. So some of the light blues in the face, and then there's like, I darkened some of the clouds around it. So some of the contrast and like the colors are not exactly as they would read today. But yeah, I think it's a really cool tattoo and represents what I like about Japanese tattooing, which is strong, bold, dark background with a lot of bright colors to contrast that. And like we talked about, it's a large focal image. The lightning is big and bold. The swirls are really big. It's something that's just kind of very classic looking and strong, and you can see from across the street, and it's still going to stand out. And I think that's those are always the things that I'm most interested in. And yeah, I think at some point he's talked about we might kind of connected those faces on the back of his arms a little bit better, but he was awesome. He got tattooed regularly. We took a small break because he had an injury, but otherwise didn't really miss a session and got it done in about a year and a half or so. But then once he was done, I think he was like ready to not get tattooed again. So I think there will be a continuation of this someday, but he's taking a little bit of a break for now.
Awesome. Yeah, not much to add. I think you covered absolutely everything. Just big, bold, powerful, and yeah, for the people looking, they can notice there's a little bit of blood, right? It's fresh, so obviously it'll look. I'm sure it'll look fantastic as well, healed. But yeah, this just loved it. I think this is the your profile picture on Instagram. Is it this dragon or is it a different one?
It is the head. The head is from that dragon. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. That's the classic Chris Wielk dragon.
Yeah, I mean the head is certainly, that's the focal point. That's always the starting place for all of the drawings. So I think this one's pretty cool, and I love the color choices on this one particularly.
Awesome, very cool. All right, I think let me stop sharing here. We're towards the tail end of our session here. Probably, in fact, this next question that I have for you, you might have already touched it, but I'm just gonna bring it up anyway because I ask it of everyone, and in case there's anything you want to add. And it's around the Horishi-Client bond while you're tattooing and once the work is complete. I know you mentioned a lot of guiding the client, right? Also sticking or trying to stick to the client's request while also making sure that it looks fantastic, right? I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add in there, or if you think we're good.
No, I think you work so closely with people and often for such long periods of time that I think it's important to really have a lot of empathy and respect for your clients. And sometimes the relationship can be challenging, but tattooing can be challenging. Getting a tattoo can be challenging. Giving a tattoo can be challenging. And I think it's important to maintain and uphold the relationship in the most respectful way possible. I certainly still think there's a distinction between it's funny, you spend all the time with people and you're involved in their lives to some extent, and they're involved in your life, and you know a lot about people, but you're not really it's still a professional relationship. Um, and I think that that's great. I think that's the way that it should be, but it's interesting that it doesn't always extend beyond that time that you've shared together, but that time that you shared together is still very important. I mean, somebody like Ray, the last guy that we've discussed, I knew him for 2 years and saw him regularly. You see these people more regularly than you see most of your friends and often your, extended family. And you get to know the intricacies of their lives, and you talk about your life and all these things. And then at the end, you're kind of like, all right, well, see you down the road, whatever that is. And it's always nice to run into people later on and catch up with them. And sorry, move myself. And then, and in New York, I do run into a lot of clients or see people, especially if there's an event around tattooing or art show or a convention or something, people will show up. So it's always nice to kind of carry that on. I have some, clients from San Francisco, and I still go out there and am in communication with them from things that I've done, going back 7 or 8 years. And even now, when I go to visit, if I'm not tattooing, then they'll often still come by the shop and catch up. So it's really nice to have those relationships with people. Your clients are your biggest, certainly hopefully your biggest fans and your biggest advertisement. Like you want to have a nice relationship because they're telling everybody about your work and they're so happy with it. And I think that's really cool. But after the tattoo, it's like I said, after the tattoo is done, the tattoo's done, and like hopefully you get to see people again or catch up with them. You have social media, so that certainly helps. But I don't think the relationship that doesn't typically extend beyond the end of the tattoo.
Good. Yeah, that makes sense. And then that's really what I hear for the most part, right? So that makes a lot of sense, and it should be nice and professional and friendly and so on and so forth. So it's great to hear. And I also like to ask him because some people might feel, I don't know, if it's their first tattoo, they might feel a little bit, I don't know, cautious or afraid or shy or whatever about the tattooers, right? So this gives you a chance to just express, hey, I'm a nice, great guy. Come come to me.
Yeah. It's something that I feel like I heard recently, or I could, something on the internet, but I think I try to keep in mind and take very seriously is like, and it's a little I think this quote or whatever this came from was talking more in the context of like walk-in tattooing, where you're doing a lot of tattoos regularly and maybe not spending as much time with people. But it was something along the lines of people, this might not be the most important thing that you're doing today, but this might be one of the most important things this person's doing in their life, and their connection to you might be much stronger than your connection to them. And I think you have to really respect and understand that. And that's not to say that there's not a boundary, but for many people, I've tattooed thousands of people, and for many people that I've tattooed, I'm the only person that they've been tattooed by. So it's kind of like a different, there's a different dynamic there on both ends of that. And I think, you just have to be aware of that as a tattooer and really also appreciate that these people are giving you this opportunity. But yeah, it's something that I certainly take seriously. And like, I'm very open with my clients, but I'm also very straightforward and kind of like have set parameters with how I like to work and all of those things, and establish these boundaries. But I still like, I think I'm not, I don't want to speak on other people, but like when you see somebody who's just tattooing with their headphones and ignoring their client or, things like that, like I think there has to be this back and forth and really embracing the fact that these people are allowing you to do this work on them and working with them, not just working on them.
Awesome. Cool. So I know, for those listening, we're at the start of the day, 8 a.m. right now. We both have to get to work very soon. So the last question for you is, what's next for you? Not today, but what's next for you in the in the long term?
Doing more tattoos. Certainly, I'd really, I've done 2 books of Flash. I really would like to do it. I have a few book projects that I would like to say are in the works, but they're at the very least in the concept phases. I'd really like to be publishing a few other projects and just kind of, I think those things are really interesting to help push my artwork forward and kind of focus things, and then also generate new ideas for tattooing and continue to generate interest. But right now, I've been in my own studio for about 8 months at the beginning of the year, and I'm really just trying to kind of focus and hone in on, continuing to improve my craft of tattooing and keep everything moving forward. I'd say uh, in the next year, I'd like to start traveling a little bit more. We're 2 years out of the pandemic or COVID, whatever the heavy part of it at least. And now that my child is getting a little bit older, also I'm able to get a little bit more freedom away from home occasionally. So I'd like to, continue go to the West Coast. I've been traveling to Virginia somewhat regularly. Next year, I did 2 tattoo conventions this year, but I'd like to do, maybe 3 or 4 next year and just kind of get out a little bit more. I think now that I am working by myself, it's important to try to get out in the world with other people occasionally. So hopefully I'll be out and around this country and possibly other countries. But between that, some book projects, I'd like, just paint more and keep tattooing, really.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Chris Wielk, thank you for your time, and I wish you a very successful career and future.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this. This has been really cool to get to talk to you and get to know you a little bit.
If you would like to learn more about the world of traditional Japanese tattooing, follow the Waboripedia Instagram page, hit like and subscribe in the YouTube and Spotify channels, and stay tuned for the meanings and stories behind Japanese tattooing, Horishi interviews, and more.